It took an entire decade and a Tyler Kolek oblique injury for UConn to finally win a road game against a top 25 team. Is this a sign they are equipped to repeat as national champions?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Thursday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your solo host for today's show, Andy Patton. Want to welcome you all in and remind you that today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Folks, right now, new customers who join today will get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more is a win. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to learn more. Well, folks, we got a trio of ranked games from Wednesday to recap. We got some other big-time results to talk about, some bubble games to talk about. We're going to close out the show previewing, some games coming up on Thursday night, 4 of them in the Pac-12, some potential bubble ramifications there. We're going to start in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where the Marquette Golden Eagles fell. The number 8 ranked team in the country fell to number 2 UConn, 74-67. The big story here, UConn somehow, inexplicably, had not won a game against a ranked team on the road, a true road game against a ranked team in 10 years. Not a top 10 team, not a top 5 team. Any top 25 team in a true road environment, UConn had gone a decade without picking up that kind of victory. A really startling fact about this UConn team in this program, considering they've won national championships, they've been the number 1 overall ranked team. Like, this was a very surprising fact, and they finally broke the streak, and it required them to play a Marquette team missing their best player, missing arguably the most impactful player in the Big East. I'm not sure. Tyler Kolek is either the best point guard or best player in the Big East, or he's the second best point guard in this game, in this matchup, depending on how you feel about Tristan Newton, because it's the two of those two guys are right there. Of course, Baylor Shireman in that conversation for Big East Player of the Year as well. But no Kolek in this game was obviously a huge storyline. And look, Marquette kept this thing really close, 74-67. It was a 7-point game in this one, but there's the second time in a row, Marquette also played Creighton without Tyler Kolek. Very unfortunate that Shaka Smart's team had to go into the 2 best games, or play the 2 best teams in the Big East Conference without their best player, without Tyler Kolek. Against Creighton, I believe Marquette had 7 total assists, whereas Kolek averages about 7.5. In this game, they had 8 total assists, but they also had 9 turnovers. That's 2 games in a row without Tyler Kolek, where they had less than 9 assists and more turnovers than assists. It is very evident. Part of that obviously is playing better teams. They weren't playing DePaul or Georgetown in those games, but still not being able to facilitate offense the way they're used to doing through Kolek is very obviously having a significant impact. Meanwhile, Chase Ross played 19 minutes, did not score in this game. Stevie Mitchell, he had an okay game, 8 points and 9 rebounds, but they just didn't have the depth. They didn't have the facilitation skills, the point guard skills, frankly, on this roster necessary to beat a team like UConn. Most teams can't beat a team like UConn. The fact that Marquette played this thing within 10, within 7, and the end result without their best player, really big testament to Marquette. However, it's still pretty hard to imagine that they can reach the threshold that they want to accomplish this year, i.e. being in the Elite 8, being in a Final Four, if Kolek is not only healthy, but at 100%. The report is that he's going to not play the rest of the season. Marquette has 1 more game at Xavier, and then they get into the Big East tournament. He's going to be reevaluated before then, and they're going to determine if they want to play him in the Big East tournament. I wouldn't be shocked if he sits out in the Big East tournament either entirely or until the very end. Marquette does not need him to still get a quality seed. Yes, if they get upset in the first round of the Big East tournament, it's possible it costs them a seed line, and they certainly don't want that. But I would rather they do that than risk playing Kolek, him re-aggravating his oblique and not being able to play in the NCAA tournament, where they then potentially risk another early upset, which would really be damaging to their reputation, to Shaka Smart's reputation, etc. Meanwhile, for UConn, Alex Karaban had 23 points in this one. Cam Spencer, incredibly well-rounded performance, 17 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, and 3 steals for him. And this is the kind of win that proves UConn can do this. Yes, they're playing a Marquette team without Kolek. We've talked about that a handful of times, but they still pulled off a tough road victory over a top 10 team, over a team they've faced quite a bit in the last couple of years, over a team that had Oso Ighodaro playing well. This is a really nice win for Marquette, or excuse me, for UConn. And while I don't know that it tells us a ton that we didn't already know, which is that this team is capable of winning a national championship and more potentially capable than many of the other teams over the last 15 years of repeating as national champions, something we have not seen since Florida did it in 2007 and 2008. These kind of wins are what help cement your ability to roll through the NCAA tournament and win that big dance for the second year in a row. Other ranked on ranked games, Iowa State survives to beat BYU 68-63. Nobody wins at Hilton in Ames, Iowa. The Cyclones 18-0 at home, 18-0 at home this year. Now, only 3 of those were against ranked teams. A lot of criticism has come out about Iowa State's pretty cushy non-conference schedule, but they took care of business in conference play. While there weren't a ton of ranked wins, they beat Houston in their home arena. They beat Kansas in their home arena, and now they beat BYU in their home arena. That's 3 pretty darn good basketball teams that TJ Otzelberger was able to pick up a victory at home against. Tim and Lipsey had 19.6 boards and 5 steals in this one. Curtis Jones had 18 off the bench, hit 3 3-pointers for that one. Because Houston beat Central Florida, we'll get to that game a little bit later. Houston still has a 1-game lead over Iowa State going into the final weekend of the Big 12 regular season. There's still a possibility that Iowa State can tie the regular season with Houston. That would require Iowa State to win their final game. They play at Kansas State on Saturday. Meanwhile, Houston hosts Kansas. Very possible Iowa State wins that game against Kansas State and Houston loses to Kansas. That could 100% happen. Kansas has, of course, struggled on the road. Houston has been very good at home, but it does set up a possibility that Iowa State could tie for the regular season championship in the Big 12. Either way, Houston going to at least have an outright title or a shared title in their first season in the Big 12. Really impressive stuff from them. Meanwhile, for BYU, they turned it over 17 times. That was the big story in this one. They went 4.5 minutes in the second half without scoring. Iowa State's a very good defensive team, made some nice adjustments in that second half, and really kind of flummoxed the Cougars in this one. BYU could still finish in the top 4. They were projected to finish 13th in the Big 12 coming into the year. They could realistically finish in the top 4. They close at home against Oklahoma State. That's one of the easier games you're going to get in the Big 12. Kansas is at Houston, like we talked about. Texas Tech is home against Baylor. If both those teams lose, which feels very possible, that would vault BYU up to 4th place in the Big 12. Finally, in our ranked on ranked games, Tennessee, they won the SEC. It is over. The Vols are your SEC regular season champions. They beat South Carolina, 17th ranked team in the country, 66-59. Connect had 26 points on 9 of 23 shooting. He had 14 of those in the first half, struggled a little bit more to shoot in the second half regardless. Michi Johnson, 0 of 7 from 3 for South Carolina. He did have 18 points, but contributed to the Gamecocks shooting under 28% from 3 in this one. The Vols close at home against Kentucky, who beat Vanderbilt. We will talk about that. Whereas the Gamecocks close at Mississippi State, who lost to Texas A&M. I will get into a little bit more of what the rest of the SEC standings might look like when we talk about Kentucky's game here. But for Tennessee, they can let everybody else battle it out for second place, for third place, for fourth place to get that double bye in the SEC tournament. Tennessee is secure at the top. What an incredible job of Rick Barnes to do this year. What an incredible performance from Dalton Knecht. It feels like we're giving him flowers every episode here on Locked On College Basketball, but he deserves them. He was the perfect addition into that Vols team and has really helped elevate this program in a level that they desperately needed. And now they're going to look to break some other serious trends in Tennessee's history and Rick Barnes' history, try to get this team to the Elite Eight, Final Four, maybe even all the way into a national championship. Well, we talked about Houston. They survived a slow first half to take down Central Florida. They're maintaining their 1-game lead into the Big 12 heading into the final weekend. We got more on that and the SEC race coming up after a word from today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts to choose from for your ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, folks, segment 2, still a Locked On College Basketball podcast. Still your host, Andy Patton, and we're still going through Wednesday's epic slate of college basketball games. We talked about the 3 ranked-on-ranked matchups in the first segment. Now we're going to look at 2 other ranked teams that played on Wednesday, as well as some other bubbly games and what those ramifications from those results might be. We'll start with Houston, because Central Florida was up 3 at half. BYU was also up at half against Iowa State. It looked like both the top 2 teams in the Big 12 could be suffering losses. Instead, they both made the necessary adjustments, came back and won. For Houston, LJ Cryer was the big story here. 25 points on 9 of 17 shooting. He was 5 of 11 from distance. Houston avoided what would have been an ugly loss here. Obviously, if they had lost and Iowa State had won, we would be heading into the final weekend of Big 12 conference play with the tie atop the standings. Houston would have dropped out of the number 1 spot without a doubt. Central Florida, we'd be having a lot of different conversations about them as a team that would have pulled off some major upsets throughout the season. Instead, Houston finds a way to win this one. Kelvin Sampson's club clamps down defensively in the second half, as they so often do. Again, Cryer had that great game. Jamal Shedd had a great game as well. And now the Cougs get a chance to close at home against Kansas. Kansas, of course, has struggled on the road this season. Houston is the best team in the Big 12. They are very successful at home. Kansas not very successful on the road. And Houston knows that a win cements first place in the Big 12. In their first year in the Big 12, Houston could completely cement that first place if they beat Kansas. That's all. You just got to beat Kansas. Now it's a 7-loss Kansas team. It's one of the biggest struggling Kansas teams we've seen in a very long time. Still a really tough ask. And again, Iowa State's got Kansas State. And I'm not saying Kansas State is an easy win by any stretch of the imagination, especially on the road for TJ Otzelberger's squad. But if you're Houston, you got to take care of business. You got to find a way to slow down Hunter Dickinson. You got to find a way to slow down Kevin McCullar. You got to find a way to score on that team, to get through McCullar, who's a great defensive player, through KJ Adams, who's a great defensive player, potentially get into Kansas's depth a little bit, because that is an area that they struggle. Houston is absolutely capable of winning this game. They will probably be favored. They probably should be favored, but it is not an easy task right now. It is the last big test for Sampson's squad to prove that they can win the Big 12 again in their first year coming over from the American Athletic Conference. We also had Kentucky beating Vanderbilt. We're not shocked by the result. We're not shocked by the fact that Kentucky dropped over 90 points. Frankly, we're almost a little surprised they didn't score 100, which is what they've been doing quite a bit in the last few weeks in the SEC. The Cats are now 2 games back of Tennessee heading into Saturday. Here's the deal with the SEC. Tennessee's 2-game lead over everybody. It's in. It's over. It's done. Tennessee is your winner of the SEC. There are 4 teams tied in second place right now. They're all 12-5. That is Kentucky, South Carolina, Auburn, and Florida. Kentucky is, of course, playing Tennessee. That game will be in Knoxville. You have South Carolina going on the road at Mississippi State. Auburn hosts Georgia. That's a nice schedule for them. Florida, they're going on the road, but it's against Vanderbilt. You got to feel pretty good if you're Auburn, playing a home game against a not very good Georgia team. You got to feel pretty good if you're Florida, going on the road, sure, but again, taking on a Vanderbilt team that has really struggled this season. South Carolina, you're going on the road at Mississippi State. That's not an easy game by any stretch of the imagination. Coach Chris Jans got that team in a pretty good spot, but they did just lose to Texas A&M. They're kind of potentially going to be a bubble team. We'll talk about that momentarily. So they really want to pick up that game. So for South Carolina, that's not easy either. And then, of course, Kentucky, toughest matchup of all of them by a landslide. They got to go win at Tennessee. 4 teams all vying for second place, for third place, for fourth place, for fifth place. One of these teams is not going to get a double bye in the SEC tournament. Is it going to be Kentucky because they lose to Tennessee? Is it going to be South Carolina? Like, this is an incredibly intriguing, exciting, unique opportunity for the SEC. These games are all going to be must-watch games on Saturday. Mark your calendars if you can. If you can just roll through a bunch of SEC games on Saturday this weekend, it is going to have a huge ramification on how the SEC tournament is set up. And for most of these teams, it's potentially going to move them up and down some seed lines as we get closer and closer to Selection Sunday. In terms of the actual game, Rob Dillingham, 23 points and 5 assists off the bench, 3 of 4 shooting, continues to be an incredibly impactful player for Kentucky despite not starting. Antonio Reeves, 20 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists for him. All right, moving on to a couple bubble games that we had on Wednesday, what those results might mean for your team if they are a bubble team and just for the NCAA tournament field of 68 in general. Seton Hall picks up a home win over Villanova. 66-56 was the final score there. Seton Hall out-rebounded Villanova by 10. That was the big storyline. Jalen Bediako, 8 offensive rebounds for him in this one. He had 11 points, 12 total boards in this one, 3 of 6 shooting. Really nice performance from him to crash the offensive glass and help Seton Hall stay in this game, get those second chance opportunities. Kadari Richmond, 20 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, and 3 steals. For Villanova, they dropped to 10-9 in the Big East. They're just 17-13 overall. It's been a really rough year for Kyle Neptune and the Wildcats. We've talked about it a handful of times. We'll talk about it more in the offseason, what it means for Kyle Neptune, how long is his leash at Villanova. This is not a program that tolerates losing. This is certainly not a program that tolerates not making the NCAA tournament. Now, Villanova is still 29th in the net as we record this on Thursday morning. They were among the last 4 buys on Lenardi's latest bracket, while Seton Hall was among the last 4 in. It is very possible they just flip, and Seton Hall becomes a last 4 buys team so that they're in without having a play-in game, whereas Villanova drops into the play-in game territory. Villanova closes at home against Creighton. Huge game for Villanova. If they're able to pull off an upset over Creighton, that vaults them off the play-in territory, probably more safely into the field of 68. Seton Hall, meanwhile, they close at home against DePaul. Very likely going to pick that one up. DePaul has not beat anybody in the Big East this year. That just further solidifies Seton Hall as a spot in the field. I still think Seton Hall is going to have to win some games in the Big East tournament to really kind of feel comfortable going into Selection Sunday. Probably the same story with Villanova as well. Although, again, if they can take care of business against Creighton, that's going to do them some really big favors heading into that Selection Sunday period of time. Staying in the Big East, Butler. They beat Xavier 72-66 at Hinkle. Butler had 13-point lead at the half, but Xavier did make it much, much closer, almost came all the way back, partly because Butler didn't really play all that well. They got out-rebounded. They shot under 41%. They shot under 25% from 3, but they won. The main reason they won is because Xavier turned the ball over 15 times. They also only shot 4 of 13 from 3. Pretty ugly game for both of these teams. And perhaps not surprisingly, Joe Lunardi doesn't have either of these teams currently on the bubble. Both of them have been kind of floating on and off the bubble throughout the season. It kind of feels like the Big East has had your big 3 teams, UConn, Marquette, Creighton, your 2 terrible teams in Georgetown and DePaul, and everybody else has been in and out of that bubble conversation. Villanova, Seton Hall, Butler, Xavier, Providence, St. John's. They've all just been kind of right in that middle of that pack. And right now, having watched big chunks of this game, having seen the final result, I kind of see why both these teams are off the bubble right now. Now, Butler, they are done until the Big East tournament. They're going to have to make a nice run or else they're not going to make the field. Xavier, they close at home against Marquette, a Marquette team missing Tyler Kolek. That's a huge opportunity for Xavier. If they can go beat Marquette and win 2 games in the Big East tournament, suddenly that resume starts to maybe creep back into that conversation. Going over the Big Ten, Michigan State held on senior night, 53-49. Folks, this one was ugly. It was a win over Northwestern. Big time win for Tom Izzo's team. They needed it, but this was a hideous game of basketball for any of you out there who watched it. Tyson Walker had 19, Malik Hall had 15 and 17 for the Spartans. Michigan State shot under 32% from the field. They shot under 12% from 3. They were 2 of 17 from 3. They were under 32% from the field. They were 65% from the free throw line, 13 of 20 from the line. That is a really ugly game for Michigan State. But again, they won. did enough defensively. Walker and Hall did enough offensively to lead this team to a victory. Both these teams, Michigan State and Northwestern, were on the 8-9 seed line in Lunardi's latest bracketology report. Obviously, a win helps secure a spot for Tom Izzo in March. It's barring a complete catastrophe or a baffling decision by the committee, Michigan State is going to make the NCAA tournament. A loss here might have made that feel a little bit more questionable, but it's still pretty likely they would have made it. And frankly, I don't think Northwestern's going to get knocked out again if they lose. They close at home against Minnesota. If they lose that game and they lose early in the Big Ten tournament, that could put them maybe into play-in territory. But both these teams are probably fairly secure. Michigan State, they close at Indiana. Good opportunity for them to pick up another decent win and kind of not only keep themselves in the field, but maybe move off that 8-9 line, move to that 7 line where Tom Izzo, frankly, is quite comfortable as a 7 seed, as we saw last year when they knocked off Marquette in the second round. A&M defeats Mississippi State in the SEC. 75-69 was the final there. A&M was up 13 at halftime. Mississippi State went on a nice run, but the Aggies ultimately held on. 4 of their 5 starters were in double figures. That's led by Manny Obaseki, who had 17 points in that one. A&M's tough when they shoot 38% from 3. They're really tough to beat. Mississippi State was a 9 seed on Lunardi's Tuesday bracketology report. Feels like they might slip down to the bubble from this one. Meanwhile, A&M, they move up to 8-9 in the SEC. That's the same record as Mississippi State, but A&M is only 49th in the net, even after the win. Mississippi State's the more likely NCAA tournament team out of the two of these, but both of these teams are struggling right now in the SEC, and neither feels like a particularly strong bet to be in the field, depending how the rest of the season goes. And then we talked about Indiana. They're playing Michigan State to close out the season, but before that, they got a win at Minnesota, 70-59. The big story around the Hoosiers right now, Mike Woodson's going to be retained. This was announced. John Rothstein tweeted it. A handful of other sources tweeted it. The plan is for Indiana to keep Mike Woodson for next season. Beyond that, who knows? Obviously been a struggle for Mike Woodson in Indiana this year. Had high expectations, brought in high-profile transfers, brought in a very high-profile freshman in Mackenzie Mbako, but the season overall has been disappointing. However, those transfers and freshmen, really good game against Minnesota. Kalel Ware in particular, 26 and 11 for him. He shot 12 of 16 from the field. Just a magnificent performance from Ware in this one. Mackenzie Mbako had 15 points as well, 3 of 4 from deep. Really nice stuff. The Hoosiers on a 3-game winning streak. They close at home against Michigan State. Potential opportunity to finish out the Big Ten season with 4 straight wins, carry some momentum, make the fan base feel a little bit better about Woodson staying around. I know they're not super thrilled right now. Obviously, it'll be very interesting to see if Dusty May, who has Indiana connections, gets hired by Ohio State, which is being rumored. If the Big Ten poaches Dusty May for a non-Indiana school and Ohio State has success under May, the Florida Atlantic coach, which they probably would, it'll be interesting to see how Indiana's fan base reacts to that, because I suspect they won't be all that happy. Meanwhile, Minnesota closes at Northwestern. They have lost 3 of their last 4 out of the bubble picture, have an opportunity to pick up a nice win to close out the season at least if they can beat Northwestern. But we got 1 Big Ten game and 4 Pac-12 games coming up on Thursday. All of them have bubble ramifications as we get into conference tournament season. We're going to get to all of that after a word from today's sponsor, Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's March Madness, opening weekend for baseball, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. I personally have Amazon Fire Sticks on pretty much every single TV in my house. I love the layout. I love the user experience. The remote is super handy. It has buttons that take you directly to Prime Video, Netflix, Disney Plus, or Hulu. And Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. And that includes us at Locked On. You can go find Locked On channels for free on Amazon Fire TV. They also have channels for the big pro leagues, college conferences as well. And Fire TV's channels let you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep you up to date on the latest in the world of sports. They also have great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos as well. So check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. To learn more, visit amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. All right, folks, closing out the show today, previewing 5 matchups coming up on Thursday evening. First, in the Big Ten, Rutgers on the road at Wisconsin, 7 Eastern time on FS1. Wisconsin has lost 3 of 4. In fact, the Badgers have lost 7 of 9. Really, really limping to the finish line in the Big Ten Conference, a team that was in conversation to be a 1 seed. I mean, they were a top 10 team. I think they peaked at 6th, 7th, something like that in the AP poll. Now they're still a 6 seed in Lenardi's latest bracketology. They're not really in serious danger of falling out. They have such a prolific quad 1 record, so many quad 1 wins, and really marquee victories this season. But this team lost to Rutgers by 22 last time. It was on the road, but a 22-point loss to Rutgers. They cannot afford another loss to Rutgers here. Again, probably not going to knock them out of the field, but really, really hurts them. It could bump them down into that dreaded 8-9 territory. They also close at Purdue. So if you're Wisconsin, you've lost your last 2 games, you lose to Rutgers, then you lose to Purdue, 4-game losing streak to end Big Ten play, just really puts them in an ugly spot. Wisconsin needs to win this one in a major way. Looking forward, 4 Pac-12 games to talk about to close this out. First, you got Colorado on the road in Eugene at Matthew Knight Arena against the Oregon Ducks, 9 Eastern time on ESPN2. FanDuel favors the Ducks by 2.5. Colorado's in the next 4 out on Lenardi's bracketology. They need a road win here. This is a quad 1 opportunity for Colorado. Oregon is 66th in the net. So if the Buffs can pull this one off, go on the road, pick up a win, that really helps their resume. Might do enough to put them much more squarely in the field, barring, of course, an early upset in the Pac-12 tournament. The Ducks aren't really on the bubble right now. Some places have kind of considered them a bubble team. A win against Colorado definitely helps. I don't know that it puts them all the way into the conversation. I don't know if it puts them all the way into the field. Probably not, but it helps. Whereas a loss really just kind of digs your hole even deeper. Oregon's probably already in Pac-12 championship or bust, but you beat Colorado here, you make a run in the Pac-12 tournament, maybe you can sneak in even if you lose in the semifinals or the championship of that Pac-12 tournament. Next up, we got an Apple Cup basketball version, Washington on the road at Washington State in Pullman, 9 Eastern time as well. That one will be on FS1. FanDuel favors the Cougs by 6.5. UW's basically just looking to play spoiler here. This is the last conference matchup between these 2 teams in a basketball setting, obviously, as Washington heads off to the Big Ten and Washington State heads into the WCC with Gonzaga and St. Mary's next year. UW has been an inconsistent up-and-down team throughout Washington State. Coach Kyle Smith has done just a phenomenal job with this program after the amount of talent that they lost last offseason. To have this program in this position where they're ranked, where they're likely, I'm almost certainly in the NCAA tournament field, barring a catastrophe. Really incredible stuff from Kyle Smith. He deserves a ton of praise for the job that they've done. Could pick up another quality win here against Washington. Send Washington with a loss as they head out into the Big Ten. Likely one of Mike Hopkins' final coaching jobs or coaching games, as he's probably not going to be retained by the Huskies after this season. We got number 5 ranked Wildcats of Arizona on the road at UCLA, 9:30 Eastern time on ESPN. FanDuel favors Arizona in that one by 8.5 points. UCLA is on a 4-game losing streak. They had won 6 in a row previously. The ups and downs, the roller coaster of the Bruins season kind of continues right here. They only lost to Arizona by 6 on the road at the McHale Center last time these 2 teams faced. I would not be surprised to see an upset here. I know it's crazy with how much UCLA has struggled this year. The offense has just been anemic under Mick Cronin, but they have been playing better as of late. Arizona has been susceptible to road losses. They lost to Stanford. They lost to Oregon State. Call me crazy. I would not be stunned if UCLA pulls this one off, picks up a big-time victory over Arizona on Thursday evening. Rounding it out, Utah going on the road to Corvallis to take on the Beavers of Oregon State, 11 Eastern time on ESPNU. FanDuel favors Utah by 7.5. Utah is still listed as a bubble team. Honestly, I don't really see it looking at their resume. Their first 4 out, according to Lenardi. They need this. obviously a loss here, I think, really cements that they're not in. Oregon State is not a good basketball team. They've struggled significantly since that magical Elite Eight run in 2021. Wayne Tinkle still has kind of carried some momentum from that and got himself a contract extension, and they just haven't been good since then. For Utah, they need this one. They need to beat Oregon and Eugene the next week, maybe pick up a few wins in the Pac-12 tournament. At that point, maybe I could start to see the at-large argument for the Utes, but right now I don't see it, and certainly a loss here would end that conversation for Utah, barring, of course, a Pac-12 tournament win for the Utes. It's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have made the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Isaac and I will be back with you on Friday to preview this incredible weekend of college basketball games. Some huge storylines coming into this final weekend of the season before we get into the meat of the conference tournaments next weekend. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, as always, peace out.